I decided to speak about telemusic and upwards intuitive music. Both works are so-called electronic music. The first one, telemusic, is music which exists only on tape and can only be heard through means of the reproduction of a tape recorder and loudspeakers. The second one is so-called live electronic music. It is played by musicians who use instruments of all sorts, traditional instruments and new instruments which are purely electronic, and also the traditional instruments are transformed by electronic means, modulators, filters, etc. Telemusic. Tele means far. Telescope, telepathy, television, telemusic. To bring something close into one space and one time, which has been previously very far away and spread over several places and spread over the time of history. This work has been composed in 1966 in Japan. I was commissioned to compose a work for the Japanese radio and to work in NHK, Nippon Hosokyukai, the Japanese radio station. They have a studio for electronic music. A few words about the works that I composed before. Telemusic. Being a child of the spiritual situation after the last war in Europe, I was deeply influenced by the so-called abstract art. The most profound impressions on us in the early 50s were Malovich's white paintings or Alber's paintings or the purely monochrome paintings, and were musical compositions like Anton von Webern, in which for the first time silence was structured as precisely as sound. Second, everything that reminded the listener, the composer as well as those who participate in a musical event, reminded to something that exists in the daily life, in the environment, was refused. No melody, no harmony, no rhythm that would remind someone at something that one knew beforehand. No elements of a recognizable style. It was a time of purification, to get rid of everything that was associative and everything that could be named, and by that everything that could be expressed in words, that could be verbalized. Words like non-figurative art were used, not only abstract to get away from the object, but also non-representative. We were also naturally influenced by philosophers who had thought about existentialism, the nothing, in a European way. And one by one we became interested in the nothing of Eastern thinkers. Until TELEMUSIK, I have tried to refuse to let anything come into my music that would be identifiable as, let's say, elements of music written during the tradition of European music, or folklore elements that would sound like music of any culture of this globe. Stravinsky became famous for having the so-called Russian elements in his music. Bartók became famous for having integrated Hungarian music, which he found traveling from village to village and recording them and transcribing them. There was a strong search for a personal style during the first half of the century. The collage was very important, not only in the visual arts, but also in music. We have composers like Varese, who, until the end of his life, was speaking of compositions in which he would represent the sound environment of New York. Integrate all the sounds. We have Stravinsky, who would always try to integrate historical objects, musical objects, music of certain composers of the 19th century, 18th century. The whole neoclassicism tried to integrate traditional items. The collage being the concept of integrating all the contradictory elements and see what happens. It anticipated what is sociologically happening nowadays, let's say in a city like New York. As I always say, where the knife is the glue between people, in every sense. And this is necessary as a transition. All the races, all the different opinions, all the religions bounce against each other before anything can happen that goes beyond a simple collage, which reaches something like an intermodulation, as I say, that one modulates the other. We come to this basic problem of TELEMUSIK. I arrived in Japan in '66, and you can imagine that the first days were extremely interesting. First of all, you have a 9-hour delay compared to Cologne in Germany, and you don't sleep. You fall asleep at about 5:45, 5:30 in the morning, and then you sleep for half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, and then you are awake again, very fresh. And then you go to the studio, work for about 10 hours a day with 3 to 4 technicians, and then the night comes and you can't sleep, and you read, you think, and you make plans, lots of sketches. This is wonderful because one is in a state of overexcitement and one has to make very quick decisions. Then there is the confusion of the Japanese, who are always extremely polite and say yes to everything. And when they think they would please you, they say no, and you have to find out what they really mean. So the yes and no confusion puts you in another state of uncertainty. You begin to fly. Then, during the first days, I immediately asked to be brought to some very characteristic ceremonies. For example, I went the first weekend, 3 days after I arrived, to a Buddhist ceremony in Kamakura, and I was extremely amazed about the musicianship of the priest, who used several instruments for punctuation of what he was reading. The taku, which is kind of sort of clays. The bokusho, then the mokugyo. Mokugyo, it sounds like a skin instrument. The bokusho, more like a wooden drum. Then the rin, little cups of metal, which have this wonderful high ringing sound. Then finally the kane, which is a larger bell. They use it for, as I said, for articulating what they are singing. Singing, it's a kind of speech singing. Bing. On a mokugyo, and while he is doing this accelerando, etc. Then afterwards I asked, for example, what is he reading? He said, most of the time, nonsense. I said, is this a kind of playing? Yes. And the priest said, oh, yes. See, when you read this, it's just sound. Sound to praise the divine. And once in a while there is an intelligible word, you would say. There you are. I immediately said to Wenami, who was the head of the studio, about my age, I want recordings of all these instruments. Okay. So he went next day with a car and recorded these instruments. Something began to happen with me that I was first very much afraid of, and that is the following. The European history has shown once in a while so-called diaries of composers, as it shows diaries of writers, sometimes diaries of painters. Let's say a lot of paintings of clay couldn't be really seen with the right eye without knowing what Tunis is like. He writes a lot about his Tunisian vacations. Or we have composers like Schrenek, who writes songs, music as a so-called Austrian diary. What happened is the change was so great in my life to come to Japan that I felt that a provincial had really come into the great world. And I felt that everything was cultured. The way to eat was 1,000,000 times more cultured than in the country where I came from. The way to dress, how to dress, the way how to receive someone, the way how to say goodbye to someone, the way how to make love, the way how to sleep, I mean how to make the bed, especially the way you want it every night, the way how to take a bath. Everything is art. It's disappearing nowadays because of this incredible American influence, naturally. Like in Europe, they become satellites, and they behave like satellites for a while, but they are strongly fighting this influence, naturally. Like, definitely, many people might have been fighting the Romans at a certain time of history. But there is this layer in Japan where everything is art. The smells, the gestures. Sunday of the first week, I went to a No theater, Kanzakaikan, a very important No school in Tokyo. There are several. And I saw Hashibenke. It's a No play with a shite. Shite is the man playing the woman with the mask. And I must tell you that a No Sunday in a certain school starts about 10 o'clock in the morning and goes to 7 o'clock in the evening. People come in, and all the people sit with their books in their hand and know exactly what it is all about, and follow each nuance of every footstep of each player and singer. They are so-called connoisseurs. And already the movement of the shite, the main figure in Hashibenke, coming from the curtain at the left side, the No scene is always the same. It is the No theater, and nothing else can be played there, and it has a very special outlook. He comes from the left side and moves to the center of the stage, and that took about half an hour until he arrived. But I must tell you that for me as a European, it was, and as a musician at the same time, it was a fantastic polyphonic, what we musicians call polyphonic experience. He moves with the foot and the body and the hands and with the head and the eyes and the head, always with different rhythms. I could do everything at once, for example. Now I have moved everything of my body at once. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a counterpoint of 5. All 5 can go synchronous in one moment, or they can go independent, etc. And then the voice comes on top. And this fabulous polyphony of one being, of the different layers of timing, was something totally new to me. And I thought how incredible an Italian singer would come on the opera and sing I Love You, for example, and just be very plain in an opera with all his movements. As we say, natural. What does it mean? He is very plain, because he is not conscious of each movement, that everything is seen and could be artful. This was a great influence. I come back to the studio just to show you how it worked. It had some preparation, I must say, within me, that I was prepared for Japan. I had prepared myself for a long time. I felt something was coming up. Well, during the first nights, I thought, why not getting away from the concept of only subliminally, yes, integrating things and then continue being an abstract artist. And as the people say, oh, you see this empty space there, this is silence and these bright sounds, that is Japan, you know. He was in Japan. I thought that is all, it comes to a kind of an abstraction which is no longer in harmony with reality. I decided to take what I found and try to create a new world. I got recordings of the No Theatre, so I became very extreme in the other sense, recorded, as I mentioned before, the instruments, the temple instruments as punctuation instruments. I participated in a ceremony shortly after the first period of my work, which is called Omitsutori. Omitsu means water, and Omitsutori means the Waters Consecration Festival. It happens in the Todaiji Temple in Nara. You will hear these words again if you come to Japan, and I would recommend that you should go to Japan. Even if you walk over the Bering Street, I would say. It is absolutely necessary nowadays to have a totally new concept of how human beings can live profoundly, artfully. And I don't think that it will be washed away by industrialization and new collectivity. Japan has great chances in being a new source of culture for the whole world. Omitsutori takes place every year for 6 weeks, and it has a climax of 3 days and 3 nights without a break. 11 priests do this ceremony, and it's pure music. Every movement, every piece of clothes, which with little rattles and rings which make sounds, every shoe is a musical instrument. I have to describe, for example, something that has become part of telemusic. There is a certain moment, in one of, let's say, in the second night, where the book of the part of 1966 of a book is opened by the chief priest, and he sees what should happen in this particular moment. 1966 at 2 o'clock in the morning. at this particular date. And he reads in the book, look in another book, which tells you what to do. Then he looks in another book, which is the book of applications, and he sees that now one should start to filter water. And then he gives the order to filter the water. Then he starts filtering water under the altar. And then briefly later, he would give the information to start to burn what we call yes, since I was told we call, the Geisha Clock. The Geisha Clock. It goes always a quarter of an hour fast. If you have 1 hour, you get only 3/4 of an hour. And the Geisha Clock is the following. It is a piece of wood, like square, like this, and there is sand, and then you get horseshoe nails. A certain number, which is looked up in the book. Let's say you get 7 horseshoe nails. And then he tells you from a design of that particular year that where the horseshoe nails should be put into the sand. So he gets the information. He starts putting horseshoe nails, tack, tack, tick, tack, tack, tick, tock, tock, tick, tack, 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 etc. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I need more. 9, 8, 9, 10, 11. Just to make a kind of a pattern. Then he opens a little box with powder and puts powder along this line of the horseshoe nails. And at a certain moment, then he starts burning the beginning, and a beautiful smell begins to fill the room. And you see that very slowly the fire is proceeding. It's not, how do you say, not a fire, it's glimmering. And then when it reaches the next nail, then a new action must be done. Then they see what happens at the first nail, what happens at the second nail, what happens at the third nail, etc. And let's say the 5th nail now would be the what I call the running moment. Then the first one puts on heavy shoes. They're all sitting, let's say, and murmuring prayers. And the first one puts on heavy shoes, like shoe sandals with, that's thick. You say soles of the shoes, and then you start block, dock, on the wooden floor. Around the altar in a square. Square is about 6 yards, 6 yards, 6 yards. In the middle is the square altar with all the rice cakes on top and the oil lights, etc. And I was outside and could pierce through holes in the walls. There was a gangway around about 1.5 yards wide, and then there was again a wooden wall at 3 sides, and behind this second wooden wall the women were allowed to listen only. They could come in from outside, but they can never go into the temple during these ceremonies. Only men were sitting at this side when this is the whole room of the temple, and there the altar. Then here men were sitting behind a curtain which is slightly transparent. The men could only guess what was happening behind the white curtain. And every once in a while, one of those priests would come out without making the slightest, taking notice of the men who were sitting there half asleep in the night, just a few, and watching and hearing all the sounds. Then he would come out, just duck, then pop, fall down and stand up again. And they had a sort of a jumping board that you have in swimming pools in Europe, and he would fall on the jumping board and be on his feet immediately again, and this enormous noise, and then all the men would just look at him and then fall asleep again. And then he would go off, and I've never found out what it means, really. And he would do that several times a night, then another one would come just very, as if nothing happened, and poof, he would fall and stand up again and go. It had just that function to cut the time without any other meaning, to cut the time. So then the running moment started. He would run around the altar, clock, and then he had laurel leaves, and when he passed the south, he would make bang, and then the second one would come. Then there's a this crescendo. 2 makes 4 feet. Clack, 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 tick, tack, etc. Then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, until all 11 were walking one after another irregularly in rhythm. And it was an enormous build-up, a crescendo of noise. We would need a lot of percussion to imitate this in our music. And then the smallest was at the end, and the tallest, like the organ pipes, the tallest in front. And then they would walk there, and then they would start running. They all look fantastic. They have these bold heads, and all in white, and wonderfully, how can I say, slim. They are not fat at all, never fat. These beautiful bodies, and fantastic eyes and faces. So that they would run faster and faster and faster. It becomes more and more periodic, very fast. And then every time they passed it, or every time they threw a laurel leaf toward the south, it goes very fast. And then again, 11 times. And then this high speed, then when the highest speed had arrived, the first one would just plof, throw one of his feet against the wooden wall, and run on, the next one, until 22 shoes had flown against this wall. And you can imagine the transformation from this enormous wooden noise to this on the floor. It goes slow, with their stockings on the floor. So that was a fantastic musical transition from hard to softer. Then when they were completely exhausted, one after another would throw himself in the corner. There he was laying. And then take a shell, and being totally exhausted, make into the shell, and a new music would start. So one after another started with a shell, so that you had 5 on one side and 6 on the other side, and the shell music with the higher and lower registers had started in a complete transition from the wood moment to the shell music. There's just one example out of many, many, many which happened during the course of these 3 days and 3 nights. And you can imagine when I come there, even having seen a lot of, let's say, Roman Catholic ceremonies in our tradition, where there's already highly stylized a fusion of music and visual theater, and where the ceremony in itself is organized since 1500 years, consciously, and always changed a little bit to make, well, now it's all deteriorating, naturally, because people don't appreciate this fantastic ceremony any longer. But there is something completely alive, and for me as a musician, it was very important. I might give one more example of the new impression in Japan, that is the timing. Not only that everything is music in certain circumstances, but the timing of the Japanese. I would say, after having been again for 6 months, 2 years ago at the World Fair in Japan, that the Japanese have, in musical terms, 2 octaves more towards the extremely fast and 2 octaves more towards the extremely slow, compared to the European. The European is, what timing is concerned, absolutely mediocre, which means he is somewhere in the middle in timing between his fastest and his slowest is a very narrow range compared to the extremely fast reactions that a Japanese might have in a certain moment, and to the extremely slow movements that he might have in another moment. And there's very little in the middle range compared to the European. Well, I give you one example. The Sumo Fight. I became a fan of Sumo Fights, though I had really stopped being interested in sports, in sports games since I was 18. I did a lot of sports myself, but then I was no longer interested in this field. I became a musician, and that was my sport then. But there is the Sumo Fight, and everybody thinks it is a very physical affair. You see these enormous monsters. Do you know Sumo Fight? In Japan, they how can I say, they prepare a special breed of human beings from childhood on. And it is a tradition in certain families to be a sumo fighter. They get very special food, like in America, certain football players. They are nourished by their mamas from their childhood on with special food to become very big and to become very strong and monsters in some way. The idea of the giant is behind it. And in Japan as well. They are much taller than all Japan. There are special shops for their dresses, for their shoes, etc., because they can't wear what the other people are wearing. They are much too big and too tall. They're enormous. I mean, everything is big, heavy. But when you see a fight, a sumo fight, which is a fantastic ceremony in itself, it starts, again, very early. Families go there. They get their food. They sit in the box with the children and everything. Until 6, 7 o'clock at a sumo day, and there are only 12 sumo days in a year in Osaka and 12 in Tokyo. That's it. It's a very important event for all Japanese. So you go there, you have your place, thousands of people are in an arena. In the middle there is the sumo fighting place, which is a mountain of sand, a square of sand, a very hard mixture of salt and sand. And there is a roof on top, and there's the judge who has wonderful dress and also a scepter in his hand. And the dress changes like cardinals of the Roman Catholic Church. They have the most fabulous colors, and they change the colors. Each judge has a different, no, not judge, each, how do you call the man in boxing who does keep order between the two fighters? What? Referee? Yeah, there's the referee of sumo. But he has such a wonderful way of doing this. He goes through nose and calls one of the nose. Then they come. They stand. Then they get some water in the mouth. They are naked. And they have only very little thing here. And start cleaning their mouth on the floor. And then get salt on their lips. They taste the salt. Get some more salt. Throw it on the floor. And look at the other one. Get some more salt. And then get in position. There's the judge. Look around, and all the people stop eating. So, then they stand and goes that high. I can't do that, really. I think I would break my shaft. And then comes this fabulous spiritual event that they look into each other's eyes, and there are, I was told, 32 possible positions. And I didn't mean that. And they look into each other's eyes and try to find out which one he might choose. And it becomes a purely spiritual fight. And traditionally, there was no time limit to look into each other's eyes. And very often it happened that they would never fight. Because there was something wrong in the air. I mean, they were so bright. And then you see it becomes a purely spiritual affair. And they read each other's eyes and look. And then they look down again and look in his eyes again. And then they do this movement. Poof! Poof! Nothing. Salt. The other one, salt. And then, next time. Boom, boom. That's it. This goes 3, 4, 5 times. And then comes the moment, when it comes, and you look and think, oh, they are going on. They can't decide themselves. Well, they stand again. Then, dong, dong. And then one of those monsters is laying. And one is standing. And it goes so quick that only extreme experts Sometimes they are with looking glasses in order to find out how he did it. Yeah, it's true. They have here, they get each other, and they have to throw, one has to throw the other over the ring, which is a straw ring, over the circle. When he's out of the circle, he is finished. There you are, this extremely slow time where almost nothing happens, and everything is spiritual, and then this change, and everything has happened. There is that great tradition of the long, slow, waiting time at the moment of the action, which is like a flashlight. And then afterwards, when he lays there, then they go back, both of them, make the same movement, and then the referent comes and holds a mirror in front of the one who has won. And makes, and he says, thank you, and he reaches the water to the next one. East is fighting against West always. And then the next fight begins. And that goes on and on and on and on. Towards the end of every day, there is the climax of the greatest fighters. And everybody has to fight everybody in order to go up in rank. In tea ceremony, it's the same. In flower arrangement, it's the same. Like most girls in Europe learn to play piano in the average families. In Japan, every girl, still nowadays, learns how to arrange flowers. There are two schools, how to arrange 2 flowers and how to arrange 3 flowers. And there was the greatest revolution in Japanese history of flower arrangement, that there was a 3rd flower one day. And then the other one is tea ceremony. They have regular lessons, they make an exam in tea ceremony. And if you live in a Japanese family, a typical Japanese family, then the tea ceremony takes place once a day. And the woman is extremely proud. She always takes new lessons when she feels she is no longer very good. And she makes the tea, and usually during the time when she makes the tea, nothing is spoken. This is extremely important for the men and for the whole family. You sit in the tea house, and if you have no longer a tea house, even in an apartment house, you have the tea room with a tatami. You sit down, and the woman makes the tea. And I was, again, extremely surprised by the timing. It happened in Kamakura for the first time. A tea master did the tea ceremony for me, which means he sat next to me. I was the guest of honor. There was Professor Omiya, a musician from Kamakura, and then his best pupil who did the action, and he just had a little stick and would, if once or twice during the course of this ceremony, hit with a little stick on one of her fingers when she had made a wrong movement. That was all. Most of it was silent. And she came in through this typical door. You go in a little room where you can hardly go through the door. That has a tradition that you had to take off the sword. The sword never fitted through the door. It was the place of calmness, and it still is. You go in, there's just one visual thing, that's one poem, which is a roll hanging at the wall, and has been prepared for this particular guest. He has examined before who you are, how old you are, what you're doing, what you might be interested in, and then he chooses one roll for you, and for the particular time of the year. And there you are, you see it, you don't understand it, then he might explain a little bit what is written on that roll, and you make the right gestures that you really dig this wonderful attitude, and then he lets you into the tea room, and there you sit. You sit on your heels. The girl comes in, and the noise she makes, the first noise is, that's when she opens that paper door with the wooden frame, when she is in. Then you hear her feet on the floor make a noise, and the silk of her dress makes a second noise, and this is very carefully studied what kind of a noise it makes. This kind of noise. Then she sits down, and then the ceremony starts, which lasts about half an hour. And every noise, every sound that is made with the lid of the teapot, first me cling, then the water shuts. You hear a little bit the noise of the water. Then she moves around again. She takes another little pot and makes purposely tang, a little sound. So every sound and every gesture that she makes, if she puts the lid here, I remember she put the lid and the master made with a stick, tick, tick, and she did it again and put the lid about 1 inch further, closer to her body. And then he was satisfied. Which means every gesture and every sound was done consciously. And then came the moment when I had to take the tea. First, yes, as a guest of honor, she offered me the teapot with 3 bows. She put it in front of me, and I was allowed to chat. And I did it with Professor Omia. I said, how wonderful what they are doing. And said, yes, be careful, you see, what she is doing now has the following meaning, and the ash is already 400 years old. This ash is a very important ash. It's the most important ash in Kamakura, because it has never been thrown away since the greatest master, and the ash is the most important and the most costly in the tea house. If the ash is lost, everything is lost. You must start everything from scratch, and you must try to find some good ash from another old tea house, etc. So he explained all this. Tea for ascending, I took a little bit. After a while, I thought, really, how strange, this tea tastes so awful. Because it got cold and it's sour, and I don't know, this green sauce, I didn't know what to do with it. But I thought, well, perhaps my taste is so degenerated that I don't taste this tea any longer. There you are. It was cleaned, the pot. Professor Omiya got the same pot a little later and got the teapot, made a bow, held it at his lips, and then tuck, 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 finished. And I thought, oh, how strange. He drinks it so quick. And then he started chatting about the pot, what a fantastic pot it was. It was the most beautiful pot in the whole house, etc. And much later, when we had left the place, he said, you know, may I say it, next time, you made a big mistake insofar as the tea doesn't taste very well if you drink it so slowly, you see. You must drink it very quick the moment it's rising in the water. Then you drink it, and then it has a beautiful taste. Aha, there I was. I had taken my time, and I had not studied the time of the tea. It has its own time. And I was not aware that though I had waited very long in preparing, and I had to wait very long until I got out of this place, that this very short moment, nevertheless, was the important moment, only it lasted extremely short. There you are, the extremely sharp change of the turn. Europe is filled with transitions, with bridges in music, with preparations to build up a climax, we say, to remember a climax, to compose a transition, to prepare, to remember, to anticipate, etc. All these are concepts of a very transitional way of changing. And this sudden way of changing and going in one direction slowly and then again going suddenly into another direction was really very new to me. And I became aware that these are the most profound things behind all music, no matter if it's modern or traditional or whatever it is. The Japanese life, the music, as part of this life, became completely modern. For me as a European, it was modern music, modern life, because it was unknown. It was new, a discovery. I purposely have not spoken about the construction of the music itself. You will find the TELEMUSIK, which I'm going to play now, after this preparation. It was my own preparation. Tries to find a unity of all these different aspects. I have to add one more characteristic. It could have easily added now to a Japanese piece. A piece with Japanese flavor, and then it would have been a Diary of Japan of Mr. Stockhausen. And I decided to go beyond this. After about 2-3 weeks, I said, get me music now, off. All the great traditions, I was never really interested in folklore music, I must accept, until that moment. I had even no knowledge, no profound knowledge of any music of Vietnam or Bali, of, let's say, of the montagnards of Vietnam, or a specific kind of Ghana music, let's say, or music of Mozambique, or music of the Kraho Indians in the upper Amazonas. I was absolutely a dilettante in these fields. And what I did is I began to study thoroughly. I got all the tapes and spent nights and nights when the technicians had left listening to these tapes. I said, in particular, every morning I was reading the newspapers, an American paper which is, well, published in English, but it's called the Japan Times. And it gave me the reports that I could read as a European on the war in Vietnam, which was on the high, in its high time at that moment, and full of distortions that I could guess. And I thought, I want to know if these people are really as cruel as they are described. At that time, you saw all the pictures where panzers were dragging bodies behind and going with high speed, lots of bodies. There was a big picture, I remember one morning. I was deeply impressed going to the studio by this picture. And I said, get me music of the Vietnamese. What are they? Are they really all dogs? And I heard the music, and you have no idea. Please, if you don't know it, get immediately the records. They are now UNESCO records. And in particular, there are two records, French records, music of Vietnam. That's all. It's very primitively made, very short excerpts of different rituals, but it is already something. And you hear the most pure, the most wonderful, naive music of gongs, of whistles, of initiation rites of 12, 13-year-old girl choirs, etc. The most fabulous music that sometimes occurs now in Europe as so-called modern music. It's textural music, stochastic music, they call it here nowadays, or statistical music, aleatoric music. There it is, since thousands of years, and very pure. I heard a lot of African music, a lot of American Indian music, I mean, South American Indian music. I mentioned the Krahos or the Shipibos. Then Hungarian music, Spanish music, though I was from Europe. I had toured in Japan and heard here and there some flamenco, but I got a good Sevillanas, which was a real discovery, which I made in Japan. There you are. And then in TELEMUSIK I used about 25 different short excerpts of all these different cultures and all the different times, some 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old, and some even older, and some more recent, like Central Chinese music with Chinese orchestra. Balinese music I heard for the first time more thoroughly. And I say this beforehand because I won't see you again for so soon, and if you would listen to TELEMUSIK alone, you could now gain time, literally gain years, because of what I say. There are these elements in TELEMUSIK, but they are no longer used in the form of a collage. As I said before, this was the problem of the first half of the century, to anticipate the whole heterogeneous variety that is mixed together in society nowadays, in the human race. But I wanted to go beyond, and the hardest time I had then in the studio was to make designs for electronic equipment to intermodulate, as I say, found objects with newly made objects. So I worked as well with generators and all the electronic equipment that is available in the studio to create sounds which have never been heard before, where I eliminate all the sounds which I know or which someone else who is working with me might know, and I said, no, get rid of it. So until we find a material which is completely unique and which is very flexible. And I then subdivided in certain categories and certain families in order to work with it and to create an organism. But the problem to integrate found objects, preformed, historically preformed objects, that was a problem that I had never solved before. I felt like a beginner. And I just give you one example for TELEMUSIK, how I would intermodulate two found objects. Let's say I have a Kraho woman singing a lullaby song for her baby. Namandava. Namandava. So simple. And I want to have just that simple line with the accents and the continuous sounds. And take only that, neither the ah, o, ah, or the naman, ah, not the timbre, but just the line, and modulate with this Spanish Sevillanas. It's etc. with the guitars. And they would use that rhythm, only the rhythm. Forget about the melody, forget about the harmony, forget about the guitar sound, and modulate the woman, Namandava, melody with his rhythm. Just with the rhythm. And then take, for example, the envelope curve of another music, which would be a priest song in a Japanese temple. 1,000 priests singing, let's say, in Koyasan temple, a peace song in a ritual. They etc. This enormous curve of dynamic curve, and I would superimpose it. But how can one do it? That's not simple. You cannot simply take one tape recorder, another one, a third one, and play it together. That doesn't lead to anything. That's just 1 + 2 + 3. It's additional process. I just make you a little design, didn't it? Which shows you how this works. Let's say you have here a recorded music, a tape recorder, and you have an output. And you put it now into what is called a so-called ring modulator. It is the symbol for an electronic ring modulator. It says that you have 2 inputs and 1 output. And the 2 inputs are suppressed in the ring modulator, and you get only the sum and the difference of what you are putting in as an output. The sum and the difference of the frequencies. Now, if I have, for example, 5 beats per second, I have such a rhythm, which I feed into one, and I have a music here. Then the music is, all the frequencies of the music are the frequencies given +5 and frequencies given -5, the frequencies per second. They have a beat. They are rhythmatized. The same would be true if I have just one envelope, dynamic envelope, in the second input here. Let's say here I have a sine wave generator. Put in the second input, and the output then shifts the music, let's say, way up to 20,000 cycles per second, where nobody can hear them anymore, only dogs. And there, now, you modulate the music with the rhythm of another one. Another music, or with an artificially made rhythm of electronic pulses, or of chords. Like, let's say I make a series of electronic chords made with a sine wave generator, or with a square wave generator, whatever it is. And superimpose different pitches, make chords, a series of chords, and modulate now the found music with this. Then the music starts sounding harmonic. No, then the music sounds harmonically with the texture of these chords. It's a real fusion, a real, how do we call it in biology, symbiosis. Is that an English word as well? Symbiotic, symbiosis? Yeah, that is extremely important, to get 2 beings together, and you get something out of the crossing which does not destroy the origins, but it supports them even, it reinforces them, but it leads to something which is more than the sum. It leads to something original, something new. And here you have the output, and you feed this output directly on another tape recorder where you record the result. But in the meantime, you put it into a second ring modulator and bring it down. So here we mix. Bring it down into the original region. So I bring it up with the ring modulator, modulate it up there, and bring it down. If I would bring it exactly with the same frequency in both generators down, then it sounds as it sounded before. But if I have a slight difference between these two generators, let's say of 1 cycle per second, this would have been 20,000 and this would have been 20,001, then the music which comes out has a beat of 1 cycle per second. If it is 20,030 and here 20,000, then all the frequencies have plus 30 cycles per second and minus 30 cycles per second, and the original frequencies are suppressed here in the outputs. That is important. I could even mix then a little bit of the original music into this final mixing, into the final mixture. And this allows me now, I have called this the Gagaku circuit since that time, because I did it for the first time with Gagaku music. And it's all described in the score of TELEMUSIK, which specialists among you might study. They are completely new circuits which I have discovered, and they built me these multiple modulators in order to intermodulate found objects with newly made objects, or one found object with another object, taking the rhythm here and modulate it with the melody of another, with the harmonic structure of another. So the so-called parameters or characteristics, the most characteristic features of one element is combined with the most characteristic of another element. They are intermodulated. They modulate each other and lead to complete new specimens, to new musical phenomena. And this is the whole process, and it is really in its status nascendi. We are just beginning to discover complete new processes of intermodulation. And I think that is where everything is going to, not only music. This discovery of the innermost laws of Genesis, in order to be able to create the most unbelievable results out of things that are found, that are given in our life, or that are artificially made. This has naturally its dangers, as you certainly can imagine. Genetically speaking, if one would apply this to biology or to the to the production of new beings, then the big question will come about very soon: what is a man, and what is an android? We will face that question very soon. So now I play TELEMUSIK, and I will switch off the lights. I go here because there is a potentiometer to adjust my tape to the acoustics of this hall. I don't do anything special.